Company refused to pay dying truckers last paycheck. His CB brothers shut down their entire operation. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., cutting through the diesel engine's rumble like a knife. And Marcus Ironhorse Sullivan knew before he even answered that it was bad news. It was the kind of call that only comes in the dead of night, the kind that carries the weight of grief and the chill of finality. On the other end was Maria, the wife of his closest friend and fellow trucker, David "Road Dog" Miller, and her voice was a ragged whisper, broken by sobs that tore at Marcus's heart. "He's gone, Marcus. David's gone. The cancer it took him this morning." Marcus pulled his Peterbilt onto the shoulder of a -70 in eastern Colorado, the red and blue lights of a distant town shimmering on the horizon, and he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, tears blurring his vision because David wasn't just a friend. He was family, a brother forged in the crucible of lonely highways and shared truck stop meals and the unspoken understanding that comes from spending decades together on the road, watching each other's backs, sharing each other's burdens, celebrating each other's triumphs and mourning each other's losses. David "Road Dog" Miller had been a trucker for 42 years, had driven 3.7 million miles without a single accident, had hauled everything from fresh produce to hazardous materials, had seen every sunrise and sunset from the cab of his Freightliner, had raised 3 kids and put them through college on a trucker's salary, had been a pillar of his community and a legend on the CB radio, known for his calm demeanor, his encyclopedic knowledge of routes, and his unwavering commitment to the brotherhood of the road. He'd been diagnosed with aggressive lung cancer 6 months ago, a cruel irony for a man who'd never smoked but had spent his life breathing diesel fumes and truck stop air, and he'd fought it with the same quiet determination he'd brought to every challenge in his life. But the road had finally claimed its toll, and David Miller had taken his last ride. Marcus stayed on the phone with Maria for another hour, listening to her grief, offering what comfort he could, promising to be there for her and the kids, promising that the trucking community would rally around them, would ensure that David's legacy was honored and his family was cared for. But then Maria said something that cut through Marcus's grief and ignited a cold, burning rage in his chest. "And to make things worse, Marcus, Road King Logistics, they're refusing to pay his last paycheck. They said because he didn't complete his final run, because he was technically on medical leave. They don't owe him the 2 weeks he worked before he got too sick to drive. They said it's company policy. They said there's nothing they can do." The silence that followed was heavier than any load Marcus had ever hauled. 2 weeks' pay. For a man who'd given his entire life to the road, who'd worked for Road King Logistics for 27 years, who'd died fighting a brutal illness, they were refusing to pay his last 2 weeks' wages, the money he'd earned, the money his family desperately needed to cover funeral expenses and medical bills, and the sudden, devastating loss of their primary income. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, about dignity, about the fundamental human decency that says you don't kick a family when they're down. You don't deny a dying man his earned wages. You don't treat a loyal employee like a disposable asset whose value ends the moment they can no longer produce profit. And here's where I need you to understand something crucial about the brotherhood of the road, because this wasn't just about one trucker's last paycheck. This was about a code, an unspoken oath that says you protect your own, you stand up for what's right, you don't let corporations exploit and abuse the people who keep this country moving. Hit that subscribe button right now because you're about to witness something that went from a personal injustice to a collective reckoning, something that shocked an entire industry and proved that when truckers unite, when they decide that enough is enough, when they choose solidarity over silence, they can shut down an entire operation and force even the most ruthless corporations to bend to the will of the people, to remember that profit isn't the only bottom line, that decency and respect and human dignity matter more than any quarterly earnings report. Marcus hung up the phone, his grief now overshadowed by a cold, controlled fury that settled deep in his bones. He knew what he had to do. He opened the CB radio app that connected him to every trucker within 200 miles, and his fingers typed a message that would set in motion a chain of events that would rip across the country, that would expose Road King Logistics for the heartless corporation it was, and that would ensure that David Road Dog Miller's last paycheck was paid, not just as a matter of financial necessity, but as a matter of honor, as a matter of justice, as a matter of proving that the Brotherhood of the Road was an unbreakable force that would not tolerate the exploitation of its members, especially not when they were gone and couldn't fight for themselves. Breaker, breaker. This is Iron Horse with a 10-33, an emergency situation that requires immediate attention from every driver who believes in the Brotherhood of the Road, who believes in justice, who believes that corporations shouldn't profit from the exploitation of working people. Our brother, David Road Dog Miller, passed away this morning after a long battle with cancer, and Road King Logistics, the company he worked for 27 years, is refusing to pay his last 2 weeks' wages, claiming company policy. This is an outrage. This is an insult to David's memory, an insult to his family, and an insult to every single one of us who keeps this country moving. I'm calling for a complete, immediate, and indefinite shutdown of all Road King Logistics operations until David Miller's last paycheck is paid, until his family receives every penny he earned, and until Road King Logistics issues a public apology for their heartless and despicable actions. If you're hauling for Road King, pull over. If you're at a Road King terminal, block the gates. If you're anywhere near a Road King operation, make your presence known. This is not a request, this is a directive. We stand with David Miller, and we will not move until justice is served. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, Marcus's phone was exploding with messages and calls. Iron Horse, this is Mama Bear. I'm at the Road King terminal in Denver, blocking the main gate now. This is Nighthawk. I'm on a Road King load to Chicago, pulling over at the next rest stop, engine off, keys out. Diesel Duke here. I got 3 rigs with me at the Road King Distribution Center in Dallas. We're shutting it down. Wildflower here. I'm a Road King driver, just pulled over in Arizona, sending a message to every Road King driver I know, telling them to join the shutdown. The CB channels lit up like a Christmas tree, the digital network of truckers sharing information and coordinating actions at light speed, because this wasn't just about David Miller. This was about every trucker who'd ever been exploited, every family who'd ever been denied what was rightfully theirs, every working person who'd ever been treated as disposable by a corporation that valued profit over people. Road King Logistics was a massive operation, one of the largest trucking companies in the country, with thousands of drivers, hundreds of terminals, and a logistical network that spanned 48 states. They moved billions of dollars worth of freight every year, operated on razor-thin margins, and prided themselves on their efficiency and their ruthless pursuit of profit. They had a reputation for treating their drivers as interchangeable parts, for pushing them to their limits, for cutting corners wherever possible, and for using every legal loophole to deny benefits and wages and compensation. They believed they were untouchable, that their size and their legal team and their corporate power made them immune to the kind of collective action that could disrupt smaller companies. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The shutdown began at 4 a.m. Pacific Time, 5 a.m. Mountain Time, 6 a.m. Central Time, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time. A synchronized, nationwide cessation of operations that brought Road King Logistics to a grinding halt. Drivers pulled their rigs onto the shoulders of highways, parked them at truck stops, or, most effectively, used them to block the entrances and exits of Road King terminals and distribution centers, creating physical barriers that made it impossible for any freight to move in or out. The company's dispatchers were flooded with calls from drivers refusing to move, from terminal managers reporting blockades, from customers demanding to know why their freight wasn't moving, why their supply chains were suddenly broken, why a massive trucking company had apparently ceased to function. Overnight, the CEO of Road King Logistics, a man named Arthur Jenkins who'd built his career on ruthless efficiency and aggressive cost-cutting, was woken up at 5:30 a.m. by his head of operations, who explained the situation with a mixture of panic and disbelief. "Mr. Jenkins, it's a complete shutdown, nationwide. Drivers are refusing to move, terminals are blocked, freight is stranded everywhere. They're calling it the road dog shutdown, and they're demanding we pay David Miller's last paycheck and issue a public apology. They're saying they won't move until we comply." Jenkins's first reaction was anger, then disbelief, then a cold, calculating assessment of the situation. He'd never encountered anything like this. He'd dealt with strikes, with labor disputes, with individual drivers complaining about wages or conditions, but never a spontaneous, nationwide shutdown orchestrated by an informal network of drivers, many of whom didn't even work for Road King, all of them united by a single cause: the last paycheck of a dead trucker. He called his lawyers, who confirmed what he already suspected, that the truckers weren't breaking any laws by parking on public property or refusing to drive, that there was no legal mechanism to force them to move, that this was a public relations nightmare that was escalating by the minute, that the company was losing millions of dollars an hour in lost revenue and broken contracts and damaged reputation. By 9 a.m. the story was national news. Local and national media outlets were reporting on the road dog shutdown, interviewing truckers who explained why they were participating, interviewing David Miller's family who spoke with heartbreaking eloquence about his life and his service, and the injustice of the company's refusal to pay his last wages. Social media was ablaze with the hashtag #PayRoadDog, with millions of people sharing the story, expressing outrage at Road King Logistics, and praising the truckers for their solidarity and their commitment to justice. Politicians were issuing statements, veteran organizations were condemning the company, and customers were threatening to pull their contracts if Road King didn't immediately resolve the situation. Marcus "Ironhorse" Sullivan, who became the de facto spokesman for the shutdown, gave an interview to CNN from the cab of his truck, his voice calm and resolute despite the chaos unfolding around him. "This isn't about money, not really. It's about respect. It's about dignity. It's about the fundamental human decency that says you don't exploit working people. You don't deny a dying man his earned wages. You don't kick a family when they're grieving. David Miller gave his life to this company, to this industry, to this country. He earned that last paycheck, and his family deserves every penny of it. We're not moving, we're not backing down. We're not surrendering this ground until Road King Logistics does the right thing, until they pay David's family, until they issue a public apology, and until they commit to changing their policies so that no other trucker's family ever has to go through this again." Arthur Jenkins watched the interview from his corporate office in Atlanta, his face grim, his anger now replaced by a cold, hard realization that he was losing, that his company was being destroyed by a single act of heartless corporate policy, that the cost of refusing to pay 2 weeks' wages was now spiraling into the hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue and reputational damage, that his board of directors was demanding answers, that his shareholders were furious, that his career was on the line, and that the only way out of this self-inflicted crisis was to surrender, to capitulate, to give the truckers exactly what they were demanding, not because it was right, but because it was the only way to save his company from complete and utter destruction. He called Marcus's cell phone, the number he'd gotten from a news reporter, and his voice was strained, devoid of its usual arrogance, tinged with the desperation of a man who was watching his empire crumble around him. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Arthur Jenkins, CEO of Road King Logistics. I understand you're leading this action. I'm calling to tell you that we're prepared to meet your demands. We will pay David Miller's family his last 2 weeks' wages, plus an additional severance package to compensate for their hardship. We will issue a public apology for our handling of this matter, and we will review our company policies to ensure that this never happens again. I just need you to call off the shutdown. My company is losing millions of dollars an hour and we can't sustain this." Marcus listened calmly, his face impassive, his voice betraying no emotion. "Mr. Jenkins, the shutdown will end when David Miller's family confirms they've received the payment, when the public apology is issued and verified, and when we receive written assurances that your company will implement policy changes to prevent this kind of exploitation in the future. Until then, the trucks stay put, and if you try to use any legal maneuvers, any intimidation tactics, any tricks to undermine this agreement, the shutdown will not only continue but will escalate to include every one of your customers, every supplier, every partner who does business with Road King Logistics. Do you understand?" Jenkins understood. He understood that he was beaten, that he was dealing with people who were more committed to justice than he was to profit, that he had no leverage, no options, no path forward except to comply. "I understand, Mr. Sullivan. We'll transfer the funds immediately. The apology will be drafted and released within the hour, and we'll send you the policy review plan by end of day. Just please end this shutdown." The funds were transferred to Maria Miller's account within 30 minutes. A payment that included David's last 2 weeks' wages, a substantial severance package, and an additional sum to cover funeral expenses and medical bills. Maria called Marcus, her voice choked with tears of relief and gratitude, confirming that the money had arrived, that the truckers had delivered on their promise, that David's last paycheck had been paid. The public apology was issued an hour later, a contrite statement from Arthur Jenkins acknowledging the company's egregious error and expressing deepest regret for the heartless and insensitive treatment of David Miller's family, promising a full review of company policies and a renewed commitment to treating employees with dignity and respect. Marcus waited until Maria confirmed the payment and the apology was public. Then he got back on the CB radio, his voice echoing across the country, carrying the message that the mission was accomplished, that justice had been served, that the Brotherhood of the Road had once again proven its power and its commitment to protecting its own. "Breaker, breaker, this is Iron Horse. Mission accomplished. Road King Logistics has paid David Miller's family, issued a public apology, and committed to policy changes. The Road Dog shutdown is officially over. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for standing together, for showing the world what solidarity looks like, for proving that when we unite, we are an unstoppable force for justice. Roll 'em out, drivers. Let's get this country moving again." The air horns that sounded across the country were like a symphony of victory, a collective roar of triumph that echoed from coast to coast, as thousands of truckers started their engines, released their brakes, and began moving their rigs, ending a shutdown that had lasted less than 12 hours but had cost Road King Logistics tens of millions of dollars and had fundamentally altered the relationship between the company and its drivers, between corporate power and collective action, between profit and people. The freight that had been stranded began to move. The supply chains that had been broken began to reconnect, and the country, which had been watching this drama unfold with rapt attention, breathed a collective sigh of relief and admiration for the truckers who had forced a powerful corporation to do the right thing. The story of the Road Dog shutdown became legendary in the trucking community, a cautionary tale for corporations and an inspiring example of collective action for working people everywhere. Road King Logistics, despite its public apology and policy changes, suffered lasting reputational damage, losing contracts and drivers and market share as customers and employees chose to do business with companies that treated their people with more dignity and respect. Arthur Jenkins was eventually forced to resign, his career destroyed by a single act of heartlessness that had cost his company dearly and had exposed his own moral bankruptcy. Maria Miller and her children were able to pay off David's medical bills, cover his funeral expenses, and have a cushion of financial security that allowed them to grieve without the added burden of economic hardship. Maria established the Road Dog Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing financial assistance to the families of truckers who died or became disabled, ensuring that no other family would have to fight for a dying trucker's last paycheck, that the Brotherhood of the Road would always be there to catch those who fell, to protect those who were vulnerable, to honor those who had given their lives to the highway. Marcus, Iron Horse, Sullivan continued driving trucks, but his role as an advocate and organizer grew, making him a national figure in the fight for trucker rights and dignity. He became a frequent speaker at labor conferences, a consultant for veteran organizations, and a voice for working people who felt exploited and unheard. He always carried a photo of David Road Dog Miller on his dashboard, a reminder of the man whose last paycheck had sparked a revolution, whose death had galvanized a community, whose memory continued to inspire thousands to stand up for what was right, to fight for justice, to prove that the Brotherhood of the Road was more than just a romantic notion. It was a living, breathing, powerful force for change. The Road Dog Foundation, supported by donations from truckers and the public, grew into a national organization, providing millions of dollars in assistance to hundreds of families, ensuring that the legacy of David Miller was one of compassion and support rather than exploitation and neglect. Trucking companies across the country, seeing the consequences that Road King Logistics had faced, began reviewing their own policies, offering better benefits, treating their drivers with more respect, understanding that the cost of decency was far less than the cost of a nationwide shutdown orchestrated by a community that refused to be ignored. And somewhere on the highways of America, thousands of truckers continue to roll, carrying the freight that keeps this country moving, but they do so with a renewed sense of solidarity, a deeper understanding of their collective power, a fierce commitment to the code that says you protect your own, you stand up for what's right, you don't let corporations exploit and abuse the people who sacrifice so much for so little. They remember David Road Dog Miller. They remember his last paycheck. They remember the day the truck stopped and the world learned that the Brotherhood of the Road is an unbreakable force, a silent army that can mobilize at a moment's notice, a collective conscience that will not tolerate injustice, that will not accept exploitation, that will not rest until every working person receives the dignity and respect they deserve, until every family is protected, until every last paycheck is paid, not just as a matter of financial transaction, but as a matter of honor, as a matter of justice, as a matter of proving that the human spirit, when united, is more powerful than any corporation, more resilient than any system, more enduring than any profit margin, and that the road ultimately belongs to the people who drive it, who live it, who die on it, and who, even in death, continue to inspire the living to fight for what is right, to stand for what is just, to never, ever let a brother's last paycheck go unpaid.